There we go, it's 1 o'clock. Okay, so we'll start our introduction. So welcome everybody to this meeting. I'm Cheryl Hadland. I chair this voluntary meeting for us just to share good practice, share knowledge. So it's, hope you enjoy your visit with us. And we've got on the call Dr. Diane Boyd. Diane, do you want to just introduce yourself before we go around to find out who else we've got?
Hi, everybody. My PhD is in early childhood education for sustainability. The ECSDN that you can see the acronym there is the Early Childhood Studies Degree Network for all the English universities who have early childhood programs, of which I am the vice chairman, leading the sustainability strategy group. And I am aligned with CREC, the Centre for Research in Early Childhood in Birmingham. And next year, they are running the AZERA conference in Brighton, and the theme will be on sustainability, and I will be part of that, and Cheryl will be there, I'm sure, presenting too.
Very exciting. Yes, I should have finished my doctorate by then, so hopefully I'll be able to present something on that. Also
Wonderful.
on sustainability in the early years, but not from the pedagogy point of view like we're doing today, but from the business side of view. So who else have we got? I'm just going to go down my screen. Micah, I can see you. Would you want to introduce yourself? Just briefly.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Micah, and I'm one of the trustees for GECA, and I also work in TOPS, on the board of directors at TOPS. My specialty is policy and legal. So
lovely, thanks, Micah.
Yeah.
And we've got Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm the Director of Quality and Audit for Aspire Training Team, and I'm also the Sustainability Lead.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. I've got Diane. Well, a lot of our people on today.
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm the Ops Director for TOPS Day Nurseries.
And we've got Sam King.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm the incoming CEO for TOPS and Aspire. So here to be Cheryl's deputy as and when she needs me.
Lovely, thanks, Sam. And I've got Wong Yu Chin. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly.
Hi, yeah, I'm Wong. I'm from Singapore. Yeah, I'm actually an EC English teacher in a kindergarten.
Welcome. I've got Andrew.
Thank you.
Hi. Oh, put the camera on.
Okay.
Hi, I'm the finance director of TOPS, and obviously like to keep an eye on this sort of thing, especially when it comes to sustainability spending.
Thanks. Okay, and who else? I've got Sam Richardson.
Hi, I'm an operations manager for Happy Days, the chain, and we are starting to ensure that we're more sustainable. So I'm coming along, bring that on board.
Brilliant, welcome, Sam. And Oliver McKinney. You there, Oliver?
Hello? Yeah,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Oliver McKinney. I work in the Department of Education in Northern Ireland, and we're developing an early learning and childcare strategy. So I'm here to learn. So
brilliant. You're very, very welcome.
Okay.
And thank you. And we've got Thabani who's doing our notes and agendas and stuff for us. And he's in South Africa. And we've got Kevin Higgs.
Good afternoon. I'm from Happy Days as well. So
Happy Days.
Happy Days. So we are keen to push forward with further advances of where we are now.
Thank you very much. Lovely to have you on board. Now, have I missed anybody? Because it's always difficult for me to see when I've got sharing screen who's on. Please shout out if there's anybody else on the call. No, thank you, Dave. Marvelous. Right, so this is our standard agenda that I'm sharing with you. We do the minutes. These meetings are recorded, so there's not a big deal about approving last minutes. But if anyone's got anything, they would have emailed it in already. The speaker for today is Diane. She's going to introduce her NCFE resource, so we can discuss that. And I'm just going to leave the dates for diaries up there for you now, so I don't have to bring this slide up again, because once I put Diane's on, that'll be a bit more difficult. So this is recorded, but if you need to take a note, those are kind of things where we've got sustainability coming up in the short-term future. But obviously a big one we'll add to that is the Brighton event, but that's not till next year. And then our next meeting is the 22nd of November, where we're going to look at nappies, as in recycling nappies or washing nappies. Okay, so I'm going to disappear that and then share Diane's slides for her. Because I have got that on my screen. She's in Wales at the moment, so we're not entirely sure how.
I'm sitting on the floor, sitting on the floor in a cottage in Wales, because I had no internet for about 2 hours. So
right time. Okay, so I've got your slide up. So now all I need to do is to share it. So I've got to go back to there. Full screen, share screen, and there we go. Can you all see that okay? Do I need to do anything different? I've got the next one. Oh, security alert. I don't want to do that. Okay, there we go. You should have full screen now. Everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Okay, Diane, over to you. I'll just
will you just press the button, or I'll just say, yeah, well, hello everybody, I'm Diane. You can press the slide.
There you go.
Hi, the aims today are to just reinforce the importance of early childhood education for sustainability, especially when Rishi Sunak is at this present moment hosting a cabinet meeting about why he's watering down green policies. Introduce you to a supportive resource for England, mainly, but I noted Oliver was here, and I am going to mention the Northern Ireland version that has just been developed, and sustainability matters, and just remind everybody about the importance of the foundations of early childhood is embedded in sustainability. Next slide. So just a reminder of what is education for sustainability. A lot of the time we talk about sustainability and it always seems to focus more on the environment, which is correct, but there are three pillars, or there's 4 pillars: social, cultural, economic, and environmental. And you can't do just environmental without recognizing that there is an impact on social, cultural, or economic. During this just this PowerPoint, I will demonstrate the importance of economic sustainability in early childhood through some research that I've been doing here in Wales. Basically, it's recognised that humanity faces urgent problems. The Brundtland Report in 1987, here we are 31 years later, and the IPC report is saying now that we are in a very dangerous window of opportunity, that we really do need to be putting sustainability on the high alert agenda, which is why it's quite sad to see the English government is looking like it's trying to sort of wiggle out of it, using the terms of we're putting England first rather than the planet first. But anyway, thank you. Next slide, Cheryl. So in the early years foundation stage, there is really no mention of sustainability, and it is mentioned in a sense in Understanding the World, but it sort of like highlights the importance of listening. And the question I sort of like really pose is can sustainability or ecological understanding or ecological practice be experienced just through listening? They talk about listening to a broad selection of stories, non-fiction, rhymes. But when you actually look at the early years foundation stage, the language of communication and literacy is about children responding appropriately and answering questions appropriately. So it doesn't actually ever ask children to ask questions. And therefore, the word listening sounds to me very, very sort of subdued, non-participatory, non-empowered. And therefore, it's about challenging this type of policy and pedagogy that comes out of the DFE at all times. I'm not saying that what is there is negative. Obviously, anything that you do in practice around sustainability and introducing children to the importance of saving their planet and issues that are economic, social, cultural and political and environmental are important, but it's about recognizing that children need to have a voice. Ironically, on September the 18th, the UN has recognized through their general comment number 26 that children have now voiced and are expected to be allowed to have a full say in anything to do with their planet. So it's actually very interesting when the government signs up for the United Nations Rights of the Child, but it's whether they actually listen to the children as well as listening in the way that they have put it in the early years foundation stage. Thank you. Next slide. So why is it important in early childhood? I think the majority of you would be able to answer that question. It's because the foundations of all fundamental attitudes and values are learnt in early childhood. Research that I've done has highlighted in Northern Ireland, for instance, that children as young as 4 are able to have sectarian views. In Australia, they are having racist views about what is deemed as an Australian. So if we recognise that children can develop negative dispositions, it is really important, and therefore that we use early childhood as the time for developing positive dispositions to learning, whether it's environmental, but also social, cultural and economic. So it's the time when foundations of many of their fundamental attitudes and values are first put into place. We know from research and from experience that even very young children are capable of sophisticated thinking in relation to socio-economic, environmental issues, and that the earlier we introduce these ideas, the better they can be. And hopefully this will be demonstrated later on in terms of the economic sustainability in the school in Wales. Thank you. The Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17. They are part of the UNESCO Agenda on 2030. They are interconnected, and like the pillars of sustainability, you must not view each of these in isolation. You must always be considering the importance of the interconnection, the interdisciplinary aspect of the goals and the pillars. Next slide. So is the question you could ask then is, do practitioners in the early years, do they link the Sustainable Development Goals to practice? Are they visible? Do they know what they are? And would they actually think, well, these are something that can be used in early years? I have only ever been to one school, and that was the school in Wales that I've done the research with, and that's the only school I've ever been in where the Sustainable Development Goals are visible at the front of the school, on the outside of the school, and on the inside of the school. And I find it quite interesting when I go to Spain, where my daughter lives in Gran Canaria, that the Sustainable Development Goals are very, very visible in lots and lots of different places. Like when she went in, she had to go in to pick up a prescription, and above the GP service in Gran Canaria, there was all of the Sustainable Development Goals with links to how the doctor service was helping. And down in Valencia on the front with the marina, all of the Sustainable Development Goals are visible. And the question I ask are they visible? And do people know what they are? Next slide, Cheryl. So when I asked teachers, when I was doing the research before the resource, there was a mixed reaction when I asked the question what the Sustainable Development Goals were and if they should be used in early childhood. The majority of the teachers had no idea what they are. They did not think that they were something that should be used in early childhood. There was still very much the idea that early childhood is not a time for talking about things that are adult or society issues. If they did think of a possible link, it was usually through PSHE or science or British fundamental values. But the majority of time, they had absolutely no idea what they are. And considering that these are part of the Agenda 2030, which the government signed up to, and which the government is supposed to be working towards, And if you actually know in Sustainable Development Goal S12, 12.8 says that all of the parties who signed the agenda in Paris, that all education policies, all education curricula, and
Uh-oh, she's frozen.
goals.
Say that last bit again, Diane, because we lost
Hello?
you with the signal. Just say the last bit. We got as far as all
It's
curricula should have the SDGs in.
Oh, so all curricular, policy and practice should have the Sustainable Development Goals embedded into it. That is actually 12.8 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, Cheryl. So this resource that I'm going to talk about was introduced in December in 2021.
Oh no, lost her again. She managed to get the DFE to actually put a link to it on their website, along with LEAF's annual report, which talked about Sustainable Development Goals. I'm hoping she's going to come back in so she can introduce her resource. I'm wondering if we can click that link and see if it'll work. Hang on a minute. It's going to be control. No, although it says that's a link, it's not actually a working link. But I'll go on one slide while we see if she comes back on or not. There we
I'll
go.
turn my camera off in case that helps.
I think we've lost altogether, actually, looking at the attendance. Oh no, I can see she's there. Maybe she's going to come back on
Hello.
again. There we go.
I am here again. Sorry,
Okay,
I've moved myself.
Not to worry.
I've moved
I'll go
myself
back to where you were when we lost you. You were just talking
No,
about
that's fine. If you
introducing
go to the next slide.
Lovely. Okay.
Yes. So if you go to the next slide, the resource has got lots of provocations. It's not about learning outcomes. It's not about sort of assessments. It's about provoking the children, and that you as an adult have no idea where that provocation could lead. So you could be in two separate settings and you read the same book, or you share the same image or a video, or a child asks the same question, and because geographically or culturally you do not know where your thinking, where the visible thinking of the children is going to go, because you are going to follow the children's lead. A question that was always asked is, are children capable of discussing societal sensitive issues? So this book that I was using for No Poverty was the book It's a No Money Day by Kate Milner. And the practitioner was reading, and they came to the page where she's saying there is no food in the fridge, even though mum works really hard, mum feels ashamed. And the practitioner asks, I wonder what a no money day might be. Has anybody got any ideas? Child one, you don't have any money. And the practitioner carries on reading and says, wake up, mum, I'm hungry. There are no words on this page, but what are they doing? And the child two says, they're looking. The practitioner says, what are they looking for? Child three, food. Well, what have they got, says the practitioner. Child two says none. So you've got this book that is provoking children to start to see from a social, cultural and economic perspective that not every child might have food or money to buy food. And this is considering this is a very, very, very current issue. This is introducing children at a very early age to start thinking about others and empathy. Next slide, Cheryl. So the extension ideas as a result of that book was the children then went to the local supermarket and they asked about donating to a food bank. They explored the idea of food heroes. So in the early years foundation stage, we always talk about heroes as lollipop men, police. So I sort of suggested we move away from that and start to look at different types of hero. And the example I gave in the resource was a food hero was Marcus Rashford, because during the COVID and the pandemic, he was very, very vocal about making sure that every child had something to eat. We discussed what is the word poverty. And so maybe that could be, in the research that I was doing before the resource, was that you have an empty lunchbox at dinner time, and that the children have to start thinking about, if somebody opened a lunchbox next to them that had no food in it, what does that actually mean? And as a result of the conversations, the children started thinking about Christmas presents, and they wondered about children not having them as a result of having no money. And then the children started to realize that children were not as fortunate as them. And as a result, with the cooperation of their parents, they started also to distribute presents to local charities for Christmas. So that's just one tiny example from the resource, which was just one book, which it led into doing all of these different activities. Next slide, Cheryl. So one of the things that we must be important when we are talking about early childhood from a practitioner as well as the child is the understanding of empathy and compassion. It's about a road towards an ethics of care, and that must involve reflexivity. It's all very well being reflexive, but you've got to change the practice if you are starting to see things that you yourself have got an unconscious bias, or children or parents might have. We have to think about children as agentic citizens. They have got to be able to have opportunities for doing things where they are questioning. It's not just about children listening. If you think back to the early years foundation stage, we have to ensure that the children in our care are children who are empathetic and also recognize that they are about global citizenship, peace, and well-being for all. So it's literally sort of like by doing that, we are promoting sustainable lifestyles in which we all live well together and flourish in our interconnected world. Thank you. Next slide, Cheryl. So what is the need for reflexivity and praxeology? In the context of climate change, for sustainability, empathy for and with another, human and non-human. And this is really important, that we start to think about non-human and not just from a human-centric perspective. So when you are doing anything in your outside area, or you're thinking about others, that you think about the non-human world as well, because they are part of the ecological systems that is keeping the planet alive. There is a lack of response to the subtle powers that influence us. As a result, when we listen, we selectively hear or overgeneralize what is familiar to us based on our own views, experiences, and feelings. So the other, so something new, is returned and taken back into our familiar. It's easy to stay with what we're comfortable with. And the importance of reflexivity and the importance of sustainability is the fact that we have to become disrupted. We have to start thinking about things that might be not comfortable for us as adults. If children ask us a question, we have to actually think, well, yeah, what is the answer to that, rather than dismissing it. So an ethics of care is relevant, which is concerned with a relationship that includes both caring as a habit of mind, characterized by the deep respect for the other, and an emphasis on the importance of relationships with respect, the otherness of the other, and resist attempting to make the other into the same. Thank you. Next slide, Cheryl. So we therefore have got to ensure that our practice is ethical, that we question aspects of everyday life, as I just with the example I gave with the book. This is something you can do with children. It's about sort of like having the intentional and committed action with a moral intent. And the power is a more astute awareness about the power, the politics, the capital P, alongside a sharpened focus on values, and therefore will have a change in action. This is called praxeology by Pascal and Bertram, which collectively can enable a transformational appreciation of the interconnected nature of early childhood for sustainability. And that is very much sitting in the social, cultural pillar of sustainability. Thank you, Cheryl. Click on it again as well. There's a picture that goes with that. This is from my colleague Naomi. She did this as part of her thesis, where she developed a framework. And therefore, this is what we used when we were doing some of our work together, that it's important you have to be open. You have to be able to think critically about incidents that you have done and recognize your own unconscious biases, and then reflect from that other perspective and consider their feelings. And as a result, you then review together and start to think from another's perspective. Always consider it with readings and research, and then reappraise the relevance and implications for your practice, and then respond with the appropriate change. And remember the benefits of sustainable reflexivity. If you're doing this as a part of the actual practice in your setting, it will become commonplace that you just won't think differently about it. And you will start to sort of like recognize your own conscious, unconscious biases, because we all have them. Thank you. The next slide, Cheryl. So let's just walk through some of the ideas linking early childhood and the Sustainable Development Goals. These are just some of the ideas that that are in the resource, that you can show how each of the goals are linked to early childhood. That I haven't provided all 17. If we've got time, we can go back and have a look at the link with the link with Cheryl. But these are just some examples that I have highlighted. Next slide, Cheryl. So obviously SDG 4 is about quality education. And we have to remember that early childhood is not a preparation for primary school. It's about a quality experience where we immerse children in all of their environments and developing a relationship with all of those inhabitants. So for SDG 4, it's very much about providing the right resources and the right environment so children can freely explore, to learn to love your locality in all seasons. And I say that because like that picture there is of two of the pictures of local children that I did some beach kindy work with. And they were literally 5 minutes from the beach. And the only time they went to the beach was in the summer for making sandcastles as a party. They never went in any other time. And we took them when it was the beach in the winter with ice coming in on the tide. Children need to learn to love the different seasons within their locality so they can start to recognize things that change. And for instance, in this beach kindy research, that one of the children identified a seaweed that was similar to the seaweed that she'd seen in Devon. And then we did some research and identified that this seaweed that was now on the beach in the northwest should not be on the beach in the northwest because it was not indigenous to the northwest. And therefore the question of the fact that the sea in the northwest must be warming for it to be starting to have seaweed from the south coming to it. This was something that was organic and natural with the children. It was part of learning to be part of their locality in all seasons, doing it intergenerationally and culturally in the sun, the wind, the rain, the snow and ice. Thank you, Cheryl. Next slide. I apologize if I'm talking quickly in case I go again. Obviously, SDG 4 cannot be achieved without SDG 3. SDG 3 is good health and well-being. You have got to, within your setting, ensure that the child is provided by physical, emotional, spiritual, cognitive and social support. And again, that is through quality practice, the strong relationships within the community, bringing in the community. Who is the community? And as I said before, you could be reading a story about some aspect of society and the school down the road would have a different cultural context. There might not be, so for instance, Polish immigrants who are living around you or refugees. You have got to recognize the people who are within your community and give a sense of belonging and cultural awareness. So it's very important that we recognize that children must need to feel that they are interconnected to that place in self. Next slide, Cheryl. So this is just SDG 9, which is industry, innovation and infrastructure. And one of the things here is that weaving fences is a traditional skill being lost. Weaving fences is something that is very traditional. It's linked to Steiner, it's linked to Froebel, it's linked to Montessori in terms of children being outside, developing practical life skills. But it's something that can be easily done within settings. And I did it with students. So when we were talking about developing an outside area, the whole aspect would be linked to all of the other SDGs as well, and economic sustainability, with finding the relevant materials to build the fence, that you use them from the forest floor if you're having twigs, or if you're going to a local garden centre, that the children are involved in that. They use real money because children don't see real money. They design the fence, they plan the materials to use. If the fence falls down, you then have the same Froebelian idea evaluating why it's fallen down and how do we make it so it's strong again. But you bring in intergenerational links. So from the local allotment association or from the local B&Q, somewhere where you can bring in other people to share skills that they have been. The local park rangers was a very good example, because the picture you can see there is the park rangers' normal fence that they do in Royden Park near me. And they will happily come into settings and show how to build traditional fences using leaves and foraging from the floor. Next slide, Cheryl. SDG 11, design and make a bug hotel. Go on an insect walk around the outside space to decide where the best place is to put your bug hotel. Research the different types of insects found to know what materials they like to sleep and live in. Try the construction out with blocks or Lego beforehand, so you're teaching children the process of design and construction. These are the building blocks for their future too, and it's part of the creativity that UNESCO asks of education for sustainability. They want children who can think about different problems. They want critical thinkers, problem solvers. So rather than it just being an adult who creates the idea of let's do a bug hotel, let the children design it. Let the children make the mistakes if it falls down. Why is it falling down? So you're using construction with blocks and Lego. You use recycled materials. You then transfer the small scale plan into a larger construction. And all of the time you're recording the children's visible thinking so they can constantly evaluate the process. Because as I said at the beginning, this is not about learning outcomes. It's not about assessments. It's about children being able to constantly review and evaluate what they are doing in a transformative way. Next slide, Cheryl. SDG 12, recycle materials in your garden. Cardboard rolls make fab containers for your seedlings. The children can design and build a wall. That wall that you can see in the picture was made using large milk cartons full of sand, and then with the support of an expert from the local garden centre, they put cement over them and created a wall for their garden. They learned to compost rather than waste. Links also to SDG 8 and 9, and links here to STEM with science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And so I'm trying to remind you about the interconnection all of the time of that. I may have said SDG 12, but there are also links to other aspects. Next slide. SDG 15, life on land. Colour discrimination. This is a clear Montessori early years practice. But how do children learn to discriminate between the different shades of green and brown in their environment? How do they know the names of trees and leaves? I went to an outstanding setting that was doing forest school, and the practitioner was actually using the words tree and leaf. They had no knowledge of what the tree was or the names of the child brought to me and said, I've got a cherry. And I sort of said, is that a cherry? And she went and asked the practitioner, and the practitioner said, I don't know what it is, but didn't follow through to say, let's find out what it is. Like on the beach, it's important that the practitioner knows the names of the seaweed. Because you need to know what the indigenous locality birds and seaweed are, but also if things start to change, because you are aware of what is happening in your environment, that you can support children with this new knowledge and support them with mapping skills of their area. Next slide, please. I'll just move on past that, and that was just continuation of nice books to use for SDG. So we need to challenge the neoliberal context. In England, we are very dominated by a deficit model associated with an obsession for development outcomes and assessment of a few narrow subjects. This is the result of a wider political and economic pressures associated with neoliberalism, which refers to the promotion of a market economy relating to money-making, greed, and decisions regarding investment and production. And in this way, neoliberalism is adopted with sustainability and the school, as I will talk to you about in a minute, which is concerned with eco rather than ego, and respectful relationships that promote a caring and compassionate world. Next slide, Cheryl. So we need to champion democratic and participatory learning. And I've used the Reggio Emilia approach for Northern Italy as an example. The democratic approaches stress the relationship between the purpose of education as a process rather than a product. Perceptions of children with rich in potential rather than vulnerable, i.e. that child who can just listen but not ask a question. And power relationships where children are the decision makers, which is in links with the United Nations General Comment number 26 that's just been released, and children who are considered to be controlled. Child's participation in their learning is a sign of SDG 4, and in contrast to the early years foundation stage in England, the Welsh curriculum, where I've done the research that you're going to see, offers a utopian pedagogy of hope for sustainability. Because in Wales, they actually use the words that children must be social activists, they must look at things from an alternative perspective, they must be able to challenge and question. And therefore, we need, as an adult, we need to learn how to listen, to share power and respond respectfully to children's voice so their perspectives are valued and taken seriously. Next slide, Cheryl. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of my latest research, which was exploring the legacy of children attending a sustainable friendly school in Wales. And so we were looking at it from the perspective of what do they think of being at this school. Next slide, Cheryl. So why did I choose this school? I've been going to the school in Llandudno for about 15 years, and the head teacher has been the head for 28 years. And he has got what you call an ecological whole systems approach that has embedded the sustainability right the way through. And as you can see on the front railings of the school, you can see the Sustainable Development Goals. The children from age 3 to 11 are lead meaningful ecological business enterprises and maintain the upkeep of animals at the school. They are authentic decision makers for all aspects of school learning life. The school includes a meaningful immersion of the 3 pillars of sustainability across 8 years of schooling as a seamless whole school approach, demonstrating the importance of early years in nurturing positive dispositions. Next slide, Cheryl. So this school is a Platinum Eco School, and their video was presented at the COP26 in Glasgow. Next slide. And I'm just going to give you this example. This is about economic sustainability in action through an awareness of actions on the planet with the choices of and reuse of materials. Every class has a business which is child-led. And I can't emphasize enough about the fact that these children are from 3 to 11. Next slide, Cheryl. The findings that we found with the research was that the children had a strong sense of who they are, of themselves and of being Welsh. They were aware of the interconnectedness of sustainability and its relevance to day-to-day life. They had strong dispositions to learning associated with caring, compassion, empathy, and agency. And it was authentic, seamless sustainability. But the one that I'm focusing on just for now is the business awareness of economic sustainability and enterprise. Next slide, Cheryl. This actually is in contrast with literature. It says that economic sustainability is seen as the weakest and least understood pillar. If you actually talked to teachers, they will emphasize the importance of environmental sustainability, but economic and social cultural is just as important, and they must have those links. If you look at the literature, a lot of literature says, for instance, here, Rhoda, children rarely understand anything about economics beyond a surface level, and that they will have a familiarity with concepts in the marketplace, such as recognizing the name McDonald's or Asda, for instance. Next slide, Cheryl. Young children, they say, must first understand the concept of conservation to actually have any awareness of money, and that it's only by the age of 7 that they can begin to understand money can be exchanged for goods, which obviously I will show you that 3-year-olds are able to do that. From 7 years, children can understand that change is returned by the shopkeeper, and that children as young as 5 can understand the value of commodities as a basic medium exchange. So thank you, Cheryl. Next slide. So these are just the early years examples of the businesses that are run in this school. So this is the nursery. The nursery is that they develop a name plaque. Every single child know that they were choosing and making a product which they will design and decorate, and then it would be for mummies or daddies to have. At this early point, there was no recognition of money to purchase the plaques, but that they were making a product for somebody else to have. So this here is links to, again, SDG 4, quality education, and the beginnings of SDG 8 with decent work and economic growth. Children understanding that they're making something which will then be given to somebody else. Next slide, Cheryl. In the 4 to 5-year-olds class, theirs were, they had a business which was vegan dandelion honey, where the children made honey from dandelions and sold it, and seed packets, which you can see in the pictures. The children knew they were making a product to sell. The language that they used was sell. They used the language of profit and cost. They knew it cost £1.50. And they also knew that the profit that they made would enable them to purchase something else which they would decide upon, or they could buy more ingredients for their business. So there was the beginnings of the circular economy forming. So again, you've got links to SDG 4 with the quality education, and SDG 15 with life on land, with the fact that you're using, they're making dandelion honey. But you've also got links to SDG 8 with decent work and economic growth, etc., etc. As you can see there in the pictures of the things that they were doing. And the children would sell these outside to outsiders. So they had a stall outside the school. They also would sell outside the school eggs, of which when King Charles came to Llandudno, he came to the school and he purchased eggs from the school outside. Next slide, Cheryl. The 5 and 6-year-olds, they did worry worms. That was their business. They made worry worms to sell. So the children understood the workings of a business. And this was language that they used. We learn about making stock and making a profit. And they understood the importance of having this knowledge. It helps when you are older with getting a job. This is what they were saying. So it's not me putting the words into their mouth. They were understanding that what they were doing was something for them to understand later on in life as well. This links to SDG 3 because they were choosing with health and well-being to make something that would help other people with the worry worms. And again, links to SDG 4 because it's the quality education that is run in the school that is allowing the children this privilege. Next slide, Cheryl. And finally, this other early years one is the year 1, year 2s, and theirs was Be Mindfulness. Now, they were very much economic decision recipients. They were understanding about having a social media platform to market their products, their language. But they also were demonstrating the beginnings of empathy and civic engagement as a result of the business. This was them talking. We choose to give the money to Mind, Young Minds in Conway, as it helps people with poorly minds to get better. This is demonstrating that they are aware of the fact that they are making money, but they're choosing to use that money for other people's purposes, and that they're sort of aware of empathy. And you can link this here too. I've put SDG 3, SDG 10, reduced inequalities, and also SDG 17, partnership for the goals. By the time they got to year 6, which was when they were 11, the children were talking about spreadsheets, data, Excel. They were talking about the circular economy. And I then followed them into secondary school and also to adult alumni. The children had 8 solid years of sustainability, and it was really important to show that what was started in when they were 3 in the nursery was sustained all the way through and was able to follow them through into their adult life in terms of what they're doing now. Some of the adults that were at school with Mr. Jones when he started as head, some are now head teachers that are embedding sustainability into their schools. One is also now the director for the environment for North West Wales. So you can see that that early childhood is the platform, it's the foundation if we continue it with a seamless curriculum. Thank you. Next slide, Cheryl. The Department of Education, obviously, they released their sustainability strategy. I've just put the links there to where you can find sustainability leadership and climate action plans that came from the government. And they have linked to Sustainability Matters. When I had developed this resource, the Department of Education approved and reviewed it and said, yes, that was fine. But and it could be approved and used, but when they developed their strategy, they said that they couldn't use the resource that focused on all of the SDGs, which goes against the whole of the Agenda 2030, because they said they only wanted to focus on SDG 13, climate action. So they asked me to write Sustainability Matters in Early Childhood, which I'll just get, which is the link is there in the slides, and this just provides examples of case studies of how you could do SDG 13 in practice. I thought it was quite ironic that whilst all of the SDGs must be looked at in connection with each other, the English government was saying to just look at SDG 13 on its own. But anyway, I'm just highlighting that for you. Next slide, Cheryl. Just a little reminder that everybody must always make sure that it doesn't matter the age of the child. Ecological books, sustainable books must be for all ages. Babies, you can start to read with babies and provide indestructible books so that they have access to the same sort of conversations that a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old can have. Next slide, Cheryl. We just need to remember we need to immerse our children. We need them to be interconnected with the community and their planet. And remember, if we always say, tell me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will understand, but step back and I will act. We have to give children the empowerment. We have to let them start to have a voice in terms of sustainability in the early years. Next slide. Just a useful text there. This book I edited was Understanding Sustainability in Early Childhood, and it looks at case studies from across England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And next slide. And I'm just going to end with this is what the resource looks like as a hard copy. But I noticed that with Oliver coming from Northern Ireland, this one is just in the final stages. This is from Northern Ireland's perspective. It has been written with, I've written it with an academic from Stranmillis University. So it's contextual to Ireland. It's contextual to Northern Ireland. It is recognising that a lot of the unconscious bias that has come out has recognised that a lot of the problems we have within the planet is around colonialism. And I'm in the process of doing an Australian one, and a Kenyan one is being done as well. And the troubles of Northern Ireland, the reconciliation of Australia, these are things that, as I said right at the beginning, when we talk about the foundational fundamental attitudes, if a 3-year-old in Australia can describe, this is his description of what an Australian is: white, blonde, blue eyes and serfs. That was what he decided. That was what, within this research, that an Australian, a little boy thought an Australian was. He didn't look at Indigenous people, nothing. And the same within Northern Ireland, where you have got the Troubles, where I went to a school in Belfast. It's an integrated primary. You drive onto the estate and you think the Queen is coming because every lamppost had a picture of the Queen or flags flying. You turn the next corner and it was the Irish tricolour. The school had a 6-foot peace wall of barbed wire all the way around it. The children went into the school and they could be friends with each other, but the moment they stepped outside, they couldn't talk to each other anymore. And therefore, we have a right, we have a duty, and we have such an important role in trying to help the social, cultural, political, and environmental and economic awareness of sustainability from a very young age. But anyway, I have no idea how long I've taken, Cheryl. I feel like I've galloped through it because I have no idea in case I went. But thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I hope it made sense.
That was really informative and inspirational, Diane. Thanks ever so much for that. No, it's really excellent, and I commend everybody to have a look at those resources. And I'm sure people have got lots of questions. So while they're thinking them up, I guess one of the challenges I feel, and perhaps because I was born and brought up in Hong Kong, and when I came to this country and started working with my own children, and they said, well, what's that, mummy? I didn't know. I had to look up, well, that's an oak tree, that's a beech tree, that's a silver birch tree. You know, that whole learning about the environment is a challenge for our people that work with young children. And it's not in their courses at college.
Nope, so, it's not.
So it's upon us really to ensure that they know that they do need to learn that stuff, or at least learn it with the children if they don't know. You know, I remember looking up rhododendrons, and I had a whole load of 3-year-olds walking down the street back from a walk saying rhododendron, rhododendron. That's quite a long word for a 3-year-old. But at least we all learned together, you know, what that was.
But I think that's important though, because I think one of the things that's important is actually saying we're learning together, and that takes you back into that democratic Reggio Emilia, where the adult is not the teacher, it's the co-researcher, and that we step away from hierarchy. We look at it and say, I don't know the answer to that question. Let's find out. You know, and it's being honest, because if you can't be honest, then you shouldn't be in education, I don't think.
That's right. We'll have to learn together, don't we?
Yeah.
So before I totally dominate, anyone else got any questions they'd like to say? Just take yourselves off mute if you wouldn't mind, or if you don't want to say it out loud, you could also put it in a chat and I'll read it for you. Any more questions?
I'll just make a comment, if I may. It seemed when you were going through the SDGs, it was a very political way of looking at them. And I'm wondering if that makes it more difficult for sort of some government agencies to accept, because focusing on climate and the environment in isolation is seemingly much more politically neutral than focusing on things like society and poverty. And I'm wondering if it's difficult to get that message over when it has kind of political overtones.
You remove the political overtones from the fact that you talk about it from a government perspective. But, you know, children go into a supermarket and they will see food banks all along the walls. They will see somebody lying in a doorway because they're homeless. Do we just walk past them and ignore it? If a child says, in the same way that Cheryl was talking about them knowing what an oak tree or a rhododendron, do we ignore these things and say, you don't have to say it's a result of government policy, but you are recognizing that there is an issue in the world where people don't have enough food to eat and they don't have enough homes, and that you start to have those conversations with children. And then the ripple effect is it also then goes out into the community through families, and then it might make a difference politically, because at the end of the day, there does need to be a change. We shouldn't, you know, we live in the West where there's so much wealth. There shouldn't be anybody sleeping on the streets. You know, it's abhorrent. You know, but then when we were at the ECEC conference, one of the things that came up was about the fact that at the ECEC that it was actually still very white, Western centric in the community of people who were at the conference. So it's about when you have students, when you are with higher education, you know, the resource is about sort of like asking questions that might make you feel uncomfortable about why do we do this? Why are we having these conversations? We have to have them because Loris Malaguzzi developed the idea of Reggio Emilia after the Second World War, because he said, I can't let children be taken into another war without them questioning, why are we doing this? And it's the same now. Why is this happening? Why are we not standing up for ourselves? I don't know if that answers your question, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I was just making a comment really about, I mean, I don't think anyone here would disagree with you in any way. Certainly from my perspective, you sort of, you're pushing out an open door there in terms of educating children. I'm just wondering if in the wider society, it's problematic if you're wanting to address, you know, problems with climate very specifically to include kind of the more wider social measures. Now, for me, it's absolutely essential because caring about the environment is a post-material concern, isn't it? Poor people don't have the wherewithal to care about the environment. They have to get whatever's cheapest. So for me, it's absolutely is a concern to improve people's, you know, personal standard of living. Unless you can do that, they can't focus on the environment. And I think that that's the connective link between sort of the social mission and the environmental mission. So yes, you know, couldn't agree with it more. Just wondered if elements in the government had found it more problematic because it is a more left-wing view.
When I did the Sustainable Development Goal resource, I originally had links to Birth to 5 in it, which was written by the Early Years Alliance. And that was the only thing they told me to take out. They said it didn't fit with government policy. Now, I took the decision that I would rather the resort was out there than not out there. And so I took it out. But when I developed Sustainability Matters, I made sure that I used the language that was in the strategy, which they had talked about young people being active. So I linked it to the United Nations Rights of the Child. I linked it to SHEAR and HEART and to the UN Convention. And I thought when they were reviewing it, I thought they would throw that out, but they didn't. They kept it in. So I felt like I got a win-win in the fact that they were at least recognizing that children do have a right to be activists. But it's whether it actually works in practice is another matter. But it's all about sort of trying to push the door a little bit open, a little bit further, etc., etc. You know, sort of thing. So, and obviously each different cultural context is different. In Northern Ireland, obviously you've got the Troubles, which is still there. In Australia, I'm going to be in Sydney in December for the launch of the Australian one, which is very much got to be about reconciliation and recognizing the deep rootedness again of colonialism, which is a very big impact of sustainability, because it always comes down to the power imbalance of the West versus the developing South. We're the ones that are making most of the mess, but we're the people who are getting the brunt end of the stick is the people who are not making the mess, if you see what I mean. But anyway, sorry, I'm waffling on again.
No, very interesting. Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions?
And again, I suppose it's just a comment you may add as well that it freaked me out every time she said, Diane, you're ready to speak. That kind of like, it was me. And I was like, oh my God. So yeah, it's I don't hear Diane very often. So yeah, I suppose for me, just from the operational side of things, it's then making sure it's really important that your staff are taught before they then pass that teaching to the children, which kind of we recognise. Is having that fine line, isn't it, of kind of not causing anxiety, where we've got lots of anxiety coming through, that social anxiety and stuff from COVID and just younger, more sensitive and aware little beings, is trying not to make it such an anxious topic that actually things can change, but actually doing it in a positive manner. So just coming from, I've got a child who's anxious, she's got anxiety, but to talk about the war in Ukraine, for example, I know it causes her too much anxiety. She asks me questions. I will answer them as honestly as I can do. But it's obviously it's trying to teach them the other formats that they can use to have child language, because you feel that you're being child language friendly and you're not. So kind of it's making sure they've got those other resources that they can access to, isn't it, to kind of teach through the team. It's a
Yeah,
very
I mean,
fine line, isn't it? I just find,
yeah.
you know, you really want them to
Yeah.
know, but you don't want to freak them out at the same
But-
time.
But I think sort of like I would say that within the resource there is links to eco anxiety
Yes.
and readings and everything for practitioners, but also you know you could look at it from the SDG 16, which is about peace and strong institutions, and SDG 17 partnerships, and the books you would read would be initially starting about being strong, not strong in a sense that I can lift these weights, but it's
Yeah.
also strong and recognizing so that you're using the language in a different way, so that you're saying this is what is happening because the children in the Ukraine and the mummies and daddies in the Ukraine are trying to be strong and stand up for what they consider to be is right. And so you don't look at it from a political stance.
No,
You
no,
just
no.
talk
Yeah.
from a but yes, and I think I stress as well in the resource that it's important that the practitioners know the children that they are with.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know the children and you don't know their cultural context, then obviously you could cause anxiety. So and that comes back to your SDG 4, the quality education has got to be that the practitioner and the setting have that knowledge of how to deal with these sort of questions, because the other example would just be to ignore it and say, ask your mummy and daddy when you get home, you know, which is what a lot of practitioners will do. Just ask your mummy and daddy when you get home, because I don't want to answer that question.
Yeah, and it's also touching base with that unconscious bias. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Is actually everyone has their own, like talking about politics just a minute ago, political viewpoints and stuff. It's not then kind of getting that out through different language. Yeah, it's really I found it really interesting. So thank you very much. It's really good.
Oh,
really
thank
good.
you.
I find it very interesting also about the kind of teaching empathy aspect, particularly as you know, children with autism are sometimes labelled as not being very empathetic, but actually it's often about communicating feelings as much as, you know, they certainly do have those feelings, but they might not have the communication skills yet. So this focus on talking about how other people feel and just getting the language for that, I think is really vital and a key linchpin of education for sustainability. If we can learn to empathize with other people, with children, animals, plants, then that's, you know, we're so well on the way.
I mean, those business enterprises sort of like were sort of enabling those children from the age of 4 upwards to start to choose who they wanted to support in their environment and their community. And so, you know, it was interesting that the children themselves chose what they wanted to do, what business they wanted to run, how they wanted to run it, and who was going to profit from it. And, you know, sort of like in comparison with the ego perspective, the children were very ecological. They wanted to support the community. They wanted to support each other. They were very, very empathetic. And again, you have to think, where does that suddenly stop? Where in our education system do we move away from that early years child who's empathetic to move towards the ego-centric, neoliberal type of thinking? So,
do you have any kind of suggestions as to how to engage with the primary schools that our children feed into? We've certainly seen in the past where, you know, we're bringing up these independent, empathetic little souls, and then they go to school and it's all whacked out of them.
Well, I mean, obviously, sort of like the sustainable strategy from the government is supposed to be doing that with the strategy, with the eco warriors and the national education part, but I don't really know enough about that yet. I don't think it's been evident. Obviously in Wales, from when I was doing the research, the difference is that they have what is called seamless curriculum. So in Wales, as in Scotland, the curriculum starts at 3 and finishes when they're 18. And so there isn't that transition. They just keep going right the way through. But it also comes down to leadership, because when we went to the secondary school, when I went with Ian and we interviewed the children who were in years 7 and 8, so they'd obviously only left a year or 2 years behind. They were still enthusiastic about sustainability, but it was interesting. Sustainability was now being earmarked just for geography. It wasn't being looked at as a whole school approach. So again, it comes down to the leadership. It's got to be the ethos of the school. It's got to be something that's embedded. By the time they were at years 9 and 10, they were talking about the fact that the school would use litter picking, which the children did without any thinking at the primary and nursery school. They were cleaning they were egg picking, they were sweeping the leaves in the yard. That was what they did as normal practice, in exactly the same way as early childhood foundational pioneers. But by the time they were in year 9 and 10 at the secondary school, litter picking was now punishment. If they were naughty, they were made to litter pick. So again, the perspective had moved away again. So it comes down without any hesitation to ethos of the school, the leadership, who is leading the team, you know, and trying to move it away from just being the one person in one classroom who's, you know, eco or environmental or Greenpeace, like the old days you used to talk about. Oh, Betty down in the year 1, she'll do it because she's environmental. It's about a whole school change, and hopefully that's what eventually will happen through the sustainable strategy. But I'm not 100% sure, and I'm not 100% sure at the moment with where Labour's going on it as well. So I don't really know where it's going, which is a bit disappointing considering where they were in 2009.
It's a shame Ofsted don't inspect on sustainability because it's not in the UFS. So why would they?
Yeah.
So it has to come from us in the ground. We have to do it ourselves, which is
and you're
fine.
doing a fabulous job, Cheryl. You are leading.
We're trying our best.
Yeah,
but, there's
you are
such a lot
fabulous.
to learn. Thank you. Thank you. I just wish we could get the DFE even to catch up with Scotland and Wales. And now it looks like Ireland as well are going to, you know, be ahead of England. I just don't know what else we can do to prompt our government and Ofsted and DFE in particular to prioritise sustainability.
Well, I mean, like I've got a meeting with Charlotte next Tuesday about sustainability. So we'll have another go again because she's now become she's the head of the early years unit now and the foundation years website. So I was trying to make her sort of like use the website, foundation years website, as another vehicle for putting information out there. But you just feel as though a lot of the time you're just banging your head against a brick wall.
Yes, when they should be leading it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that within the DFE, they've all got different units. There's the early years unit and there's the sustainability unit, but they don't talk to each other.
No, not at all. Talk about isolating their SDGs. They isolate themselves.
I know. And then sort of like all these crumbling buildings. I mean, like I could actually believe it because like when I went to meet Nadim Zakarari, what was it, 2 years ago when he was the education secretary, and I walked into the DFE and I thought, what a bloody marvellous building this is. It was amazing. And then I've heard that it was £35 million worth of interior design that had done it. It was amazing. But they can spend £35 million on doing that building up. It was incredible. You walked in. Have you ever been in there, Cheryl?
Yes, I have. But I don't think it's got solar panels or anything like that on it.
No, it's absolutely incredible. But you think, my God, so the priority was to make sure that all of your rooms looked beautiful, but schools and the infrastructure, SDG 9, is out the window.
Yeah, all delays.
But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm off again.
No, and I think we would put a fourth pillar on the 3 pillars of governance, because as you say, without the leadership enabling everything to happen, it just often doesn't, because you've got one passionate educator or teacher. It's not really enough. It needs to be supported with everything that's in place, you know, from job descriptions to training, inductions and all that in order to support our educators to do their bit for the children.
I think as well with leadership, which TOPS does so well, is that actually, if you're going to prioritise sustainability, sometimes other things have to go down the list. Yeah. And that's the world we live in, that sometimes there's hard choices about it. Yeah. And it's only the leadership that can make those choices. And sometimes, you know, me certainly sort of deputising for Cheryl, find the balance that you have to strike. Immensely difficult, and it is a real challenge of leadership to balance all of those pillars and to know this thing we can't compromise on, this thing we have to be pragmatic about. It's a really difficult choice, and it's something we don't talk enough about, really.
No.
I was just reading about stakeholder salience. It's a theory of how you balance the importance of things.
Right.
And one of the aspects of working out the importance of a stakeholder, whether that's a child or a parent or or the DFE is the legal position, and kind of the risks of what happens if you don't listen to that particular stakeholder. But it's a, you know, it's a complex, wicked issue. It's not one that just kind of, okay, you know, I'll prioritize. But I have found for many of our nursery managers that they're prioritizing the children. So what is in the children's interests, and that's great. And it's obviously the most important thing. But it's not just about the children here and now. It's about the children's future prosperity. How can we set them up best? And that's where learning about sustainability is fundamental. So, you know, for me, it absolutely has to be embedded into as many decisions as we can, preferably every decision, but I totally accept that it can't be, you know, top of the game, because you don't have an infinite amount of money to spend on it. It's got to be done in other ways. Kelly, how about you? Any questions from a kind of training provider perspective, you know, as to how to implement these SDGs into how we're training our apprentices?
I don't have any questions, but we do use your NCFE resource already.
Right.
So we've embedded that into all of our qualifications, not just early years, but into our business skills courses as well. And they're starting to make reference to the SDGs as they're submitting assignments. So we've started to encourage the tutors to pick out any sort of sustainability or any of the SDGs within their assignments or observations, and make reference to the SDG that they're looking at. So hopefully over time, we're only in the early stages of this, so it's it's been quite a lot of work that we are now. It's starting to come through now organically. So I didn't want it to be too structured. I wanted it just to come through naturally through all the trainers, and it is starting to come through now, which is great.
Because in a sense, because when I went into schools and I was talking to teachers and they didn't know what they were, the resource was sort of like so that students could go in and working with the teachers, they could bring, it could be coming in from the bottom up approach, but also higher education. I was doing it when I was teaching at John Moores. We were using sustainable development goals so that when students went out onto placements. And I've got a colleague who's at Middlesex University and at Hull, and they're going to be doing some research around that is, again, like you, Kelly, that it's now starting to creep through in their essays that the students are mentioning the SDGs. And then Andrea at Stranmillis University in Northern Ireland is going to be using it, the Northern Ireland version, as of this September. And hopefully, again, in a year's time, we'll start to see evidence in Northern Ireland of the Sustainable Development Goals coming through into essays. And therefore, you're looking at it from a student assessment, which is what 12.8 was saying, assessments, policy and practice, if we can get it in any ways. But that's really positive news. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, because it's not part of the curriculum. It's not embedded in any of the apprenticeship standards. So it's been really tough to try and get the learners engaged. It's easier in TOPS because they've already got that in mind. But we work with like 50% of ours are external settings as well. So it's been quite tough to get them to understand why we're doing this and what's the reason behind it, because it's not in their outcomes or it's not a requirement. So it's a work in progress, but we are making a positive impact, which is great. And Ofsted picked up on that when we had our latest Ofsted inspection. They could see the sustainability coming through really strong.
Wow. Yeah, that's really good. I think it's only when you start getting Ofsted mentioning it in reports as a positive, like it did in 2008, 2003 and 2009, that it then will start to hit the Department of Education.
Yeah, he did make reference to it because we made sure that, because it's not a requirement for Ofsted, but he managed to fit it into the report. But it's funny because it used to be in the Ofsted requirement for adult education. There used to be a sustainability section and then they've removed it.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so they're going backwards. So they are trying to, I know our Ofsted inspector, he's very hot on sustainability, and he is trying to push for sustainability to come back into the Ofsted inspections. And because we're getting a new it's the new HMIs coming in, I think, next year. So it might be a good opportunity to try and get them to change the Ofsted handbook to include it. That would be the ideal time.
Cheryl, should we try and do that?
DFE to because they always say, oh, well, they're inspecting what the DFE say they should inspect.
Yeah, they
know,
don't talk to each other though, do they?
don't,
They all
no.
work in isolation. Yeah.
Well, if the early years unit doesn't even talk to the sustainability unit inside the building, they're not going to talk to people outside the building. It's just, I mean, really, really
No.
hard.
Yeah,
But
it is. Right. Anybody else got any other questions?
is Oliver still here?
Looks like he's dropped off.
I think
Oh,
he's
I was
just
going to say,
gone.
sort of like, it would have been interesting to hear from his
Yes.
perspective, because he'd mentioned Northern Ireland and about developing it through something. It would have been interesting to hear whether he
Yeah.
felt he could have used it. But
Indeed.
anyway, well, you know, Cheryl's got my communication details if you needed anything further, and hopefully sort of everybody will find that they can embed the sustainable development goals in some format without it being too political. Although
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with being political, with a little p rather than a big P.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed, Diane. That was really interesting and good discussion afterwards as well. So I think we'll bring our meeting to an end, and hopefully see you all again next time when we can talk about nappies, but I'll probably pull in kind of pads and women's menstruation items as well, because it's very much the same sort of topic.
Yes.
You know, and the younger generation are using alternatives. You know, they're not using the one-use plastic versions exclusively anymore, and I'm very encouraged by that. So yeah, we can have a good discussion about that next time. And that again is a very complex issue. It's not an easy solution at the moment, but there is a new report on it.
We're just doing some work on that, Cheryl, as well, because we're part of the end period poverty
Oh yeah,
for 16 to 18-year-olds. So I'll have something for you for the next one.
that would be great, because when I was in a motorway service station the other day, and they've got these things on the back of the toilet doors saying, can you contribute to this end period poverty thing? But it's all about their packs are all one-use stuff. But actually, you think it would make a lot more sense to provide something that they could wash and reuse, every period, rather than something they just used once.
Yeah.
But they, don't seem to have gone that way, even though, people like my daughter who's in her 20s, that's exactly what she does. Reusable pads, reusable makeup wipes, this kind of stuff, rather than the one-use stuff.
They're more readily available now. So I know even Primark, for example, they sell period pants.
Perfect. Yeah.
And there's loads of really positive reviews about them and stuff. So actually they're becoming the new norm. Whereas before people were like, oh God, no. Now they're like, oh, do you use them? How did you find them? Like, actually, there's a conversation about it. So it's a norm, which is always good.
So encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah.
So encouraging. So we can have more of that next month. Thanks all,
Well, thank
everybody.
you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.